So, COP26 is in town. The great global climate change negotiations, as it were, have come to Glasgow, and the media are full of hype and drama and all the usual rubbish that the media like to print. So the question to ask here is, do these negotiations at COP26 really matter? And the answer to that question is yes and no. So let's start. With events such as these, the vast majority of the work is done before the actual event itself. So all these world leaders turning up to be seen, to make a splash, to make a show, that doesn't really matter very much in negotiations terms. That is because they will attend a few meetings, they will have informal conversations, and even at the more formal meeting, which might seem more negotiation-like, all they will be doing is reading from prepared scripts. In terms of actually making things happen or changing anything, not really. A lot of the work has already been done. Either you've reached agreement or you kind of haven't. You very rarely find in these scenarios that the world leaders will push it. There might be a few bits on the headline issues, for example, wider agreement to reduce the amount of carbon or the temperature targets or so on. But those types of agreement, those types of things are contained in the declarations. And the important thing to remember about the declarations is that they're very vague and nebulous and non-attributable. So simply put, no one's feet gets held to the fire in terms of achieving those targets, because you can't measure those targets against individual countries. So these negotiations don't achieve anything in that respect. So they don't serve any particular purpose, it's just a show. But that is not the complete story. Because of course behind the scenes will be a lot of technical detail. And there'll be a lot of agreement to reach that don't make it to the press, that don't grab the headlines. And those perhaps are what matter. Because the fundamental truth is that every individual country will make their own decision as to whether to take climate change seriously, whether to retool their economy, whether to invest in green technologies. Agreement at COP26 or any other large event doesn't change that. Those countries will make those decisions individually, and how they do it will again be completely up to them. So nothing changes in that respect. If they're good actors in that regard, they'll carry on being good actors. If they're not, they'll carry on not being good actors. But what does matter to any company, any country, when it comes to climate change, is access to technologies and access to finances. And those are where the true details lie, and that's what are the things to look for. So what sort of examples of meaningful agreement, meaningful negotiation might you get at COP26? Well, one will be, and just use a speculative example, because this is all pure speculation. Let's say the countries, for example, agree to fund Brazil in order not to stop the Amazonian deforestation. So, the big countries could agree that. They could agree that, money can be spent in certain ways, whether that's on enforcement, whether that's on trying to create different types of farming livelihoods to stop people feeling the need to chop and burn down trees in Brazil, that sort of thing. So that is one meaningful set of objectives, but that comes with money. When you start seeing money being given to specific programs, those are where the proper negotiations are held. But the other crucial point, and this is going to be a particularly important theme in a post-pandemic type world, is access to technology and access to investment. And that can come in two forms. It can come with ensuring everybody has fair or equal access to whichever great technologies are invented. Because this is one of the potential barriers to meaningful climate change initiatives, in that if any company develops an absolutely superb technology, let's say hyper efficient solar panels or wind farms or whatever, those companies put themselves in a leading position to make lots of profit. But that doesn't necessarily work for the poorer countries or the countries that need to invest in that in scale. And some countries may not even have access to that. They may just not be granted access to that type of technology. So any agreement that ensures that everybody has access to those emerging technologies will be important, and it will be what countries will want. Because if you weren't in the country that had the company that invented those technologies, then you want to have some kind of guarantee that you can secure that access to some kind of fair and reasonable terms. So that's one aspect of it, what's important. The other one will be joint initiatives. And that's where countries may club together to develop things. Let's take, again, another speculative and theoretical example. Let's imagine fusion technology, something that countries might see as great to have to combat climate change, which it is. It can be a very clean source of energy. It's also horrifically expensive to develop, very difficult to develop as well, taking a long time. So this is where, again, more meaningful action negotiations may take place. This is where countries will pool together their finances in what are the most promising technologies. And again, we're doing this in order to secure access to that technology to enable them to build it in country, not only to meet climate change objectives, but also to meet energy independence objectives as well. Because that's going to be the other theme here as well, and that's going to be energy independence. Everyone is going to be conscious that being dependent upon oil or gas, especially gas from sources like Russia, is just economically risky, never mind about the environmental impact. So I think the targets that you're most likely to see nations agree to, the initiatives they're most likely to agree to, are the ones that serve their economic ends as well as their climate goals. And that's where to really focus the details, focus the attention on what comes out. So it'll be interesting to see what COP26 results in. I suspect that, as usual, there'll be a lot of hot air, there'll be a lot of very high-level objectives, but what there won't be is any mutual agreement towards some kind of enforcement. At the end of the day, you can put a sign up to a statement that every single country must reduce their emissions by 25%, for example. But if you don't have any enforcement body, that's a meaningless target. Some countries may comply, some countries won't. What do you do for those that don't? Do you have any central court that will actually enforce that target? And that's always the weakness with any of these sort of agreements made at these summits, is that people can sign up to stuff, but they're just not held to it. And it's very difficult to do that. And I think as well, there's a political, cultural, democratic sort of angle to this as well. Because the reality is, if a country like China says it's going to reduce its emissions by 25%, then there's reasonable odds that China will actually make a decent effort at doing so. And part of the reason for that is that due to the political nature of the Chinese system, commitments are sort of seen as personally attributable. So the president of China has to be seen as credible when he signs up to specific targets and commitments. And so the Chinese system will take that presidential decree, as it were, and make quite a significant effort towards achieving it, because the credibility of China as a diplomat, as an international player, rests upon fulfilling their promises. Whereas we can contrast it with the US, and Biden may personally be equally as committed as the Chinese president towards reducing emissions, but everybody knows that Biden is not going to stand for re-election. So whoever comes after Biden is going to play a more significant role in implementing any of the agreements that are made at COP26. Just as important is the US political system, whether that be through the Congress or the Senate, because they will have to ratify and agree. And it's very obvious that there isn't really broad agreement within the US system for climate change objectives. So the likes of President Biden may sign up to targets, may make significant agreements, but they can't be enforced. And everybody knows that, come 4 years' time when a different president might be in charge, those agreements, those targets may be meaningless. So this is one of the ironic aspects of these types of summits, is that less democratic countries like China are more likely to fulfill their promises than democratic ones due to democratic cycles. Those democratic countries that already are good players in this regard, so you might talk about the Scandinavian countries, for example, will carry on being like that regardless of democratic changes and due to the way they operate, their buy-in to these objectives. So all this is worth bearing in mind with COP26, and we shall see what political declarations are made, but more importantly, we'll see what the small print, what the technical agreements say, because that will be the true measure of whether anything substantive has been achieved.